I walked into my surprise 30th birthday and stepped into a public execution. No balloons, no smiles, just 75 relatives staring like I had already been convicted. My dad held up DNA results and told me I was not theirs, then demanded I pay them back. My mom yanked my car keys while my sister went live. Then I saw him, one stranger in the crowd who looked like he had been waiting 30 years for this exact moment. My name is Gracie Coleman. And for exactly 3 seconds after I placed my hand on the brass handle of the double doors, I believed I was walking into a new chapter of my life. I believed that the text message from my sister, the frantic coordination, and the secretive whispers over the last month were signs of affection. I believed that my parents, Ray and Denise, had finally decided to bridge the chasm that had widened between us over the last decade. I believed that turning 30 meant I had finally earned my seat at the table. I was wrong. I was not walking into a celebration. I was walking into an arraignment. The Briarstone Room in Asheville was the kind of place you rented when you wanted to prove you had money. Even if you had to put the deposit on a credit card, it smelled of old mahogany, floor wax, and the heavy, cloying scent of lilies. As I pushed the heavy doors open, breathless and smoothing down the front of the navy blue dress I had bought specifically for this night, I arranged my face into a look of surprised delight. I was ready to feign shock. I was ready to hug aunts I had not seen in years. I was ready to be the grateful daughter. But there was no shout of surprise. There was no pop of champagne corks. There was no music. There was only silence. It was a thick, suffocating silence that hit me harder than a physical blow. The room was arranged not for a party, but for a tribunal. About 75 of my relatives were there. Aunts, uncles, cousins, people I recognized from holiday cards and distant weddings. They were not mingling. They were not holding drinks. They were seated in rows of folding chairs that had been set up facing a single, long table covered in a white cloth at the far end of the room. The air conditioner hummed aggressively, vibrating against the quiet. I stood in the doorway, my smile faltering, then freezing, then slowly dissolving into a mask of confusion. My father, Ray Coleman, stood behind the long table. He was wearing his Sunday suit, the gray one that was a little too tight in the shoulders, and he was gripping a microphone like a weapon. Next to him sat my mother, Denise. She was staring at the tablecloth, her jaw set so hard I could see the muscles twitching in her cheek, and to her right was my younger sister, Kinsley. Kinsley was the only one moving. She had her phone raised, the ring light attached to the case blindingly bright in the dim room. She was panning the camera back and forth, from the silent crowd to me, then back to Ray. I took a tentative step forward. The heels of my shoes clicked loudly on the hardwood floor, echoing like gunshots. "Mom? Dad?" I asked, my voice small, barely carrying across the distance. "What is this?" Ray did not smile. He did not wave me over to give me a birthday hug. He tapped the microphone. The sound of his finger hitting the mesh boomed through the speakers, making a few cousins in the front row flinch. "Sit down, Gracie," Ray said. His voice was flat, devoid of warmth. It was the voice he used when he was negotiating a car trade, transactional and cold. I felt a cold prickle of sweat run down my spine. I looked around the room, searching for an ally. I saw my Aunt Marlene, a woman who used to sneak me candy when I was a child. She looked away, staring intently at her hands. I saw Uncle Vince, usually the loud jokester of the family, looking pale and sick. He refused to meet my eyes. They knew, whatever this was, they all knew. I did not sit down. I walked toward the front, my legs feeling heavy, as if I were wading through water. "Why is everyone looking at me like that?" I asked. "Is this a joke?" Because if it is not funny. Ray reached down to the table and picked up a red folder. It was thick, bulging with papers. He held it up for the room to see, turning it left and right like a preacher displaying a holy text. "We gathered everyone here tonight because we are done living a lie," Ray announced. He looked straight at the camera lens on Kinsley's phone, ignoring me entirely. We have sacrificed. We have given everything, and for 30 years, we have been deceived. He threw the folder onto the table. It landed with a heavy slap. This is a DNA test, Ray said. The words hung in the air. We got the results 3 days ago. I stopped walking. I was 10 feet away from them. The room began to spin slightly. A test? Why would they take a DNA test? It confirms what we have suspected for a long time, Ray continued, his voice rising, gaining the rhythm of righteous indignation. You are not ours. Gracie, you are not a Coleman. We do not know whose stray mistake you were, but the science says you do not have a drop of my blood in your veins. I stared at him. The words made sense individually, but together they formed a sentence that my brain refused to process. Of course I was theirs. I had Denise's nose. I had Ray's temper. I had grown up in their house, eaten at their table, nursed them through flu seasons and broken bones. That is ridiculous, I said, my voice shaking. I did not mean to sound weak, but the floor was falling out from under me. I am your daughter. No. Denise spoke up. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She did not look sad. She looked angry. She looked vindicated. You are a leech. Denise marched around the table. She came at me fast. I flinched, expecting a slap, but she didn't raise her hand to my face. Instead, she plunged her hand into the pocket of my dress. I gasped, stumbling back, but she was faster. She yanked out my car keys. Hey, I shouted, the nurse in me finally kicking in. The part of me that dealt with delirious patience and trauma. Give that back. It is a 2022 Toyota RAV4, Denise shouted, turning to the crowd, holding the keys up, paid for with Coleman money, insured with Coleman money. If she is not family, she does not get the family perks. I bought that car, I yelled, the shock turning into a hot, blinding rage. I made the payments. I transferred the money to you every month. Mom, you said you could get a better insurance rate if it stayed on your policy. Lies, Denise shrieked. She looked deranged, her eyes wide. She turned to Kinsley's phone. Tell them, Kinsley, tell them how she bleeds us dry. Kinsley stepped closer, the phone inches from my face. I could see the stream of comments scrolling up the screen on the side. OMG, is this real? She looks guilty. Worst birthday ever, LOL. Hi guys, Kinsley said to her audience, using her influencer voice, breathless and dramatic. We are here live at the Briarstone. My parents are finally exposing the truth. 30 years of deception. Look at her face. She knows she is caught. Get that phone out of my face. Kinsley, I warned, reaching for it. Kinsley jumped back, playing the victim. Do not touch me. She is getting violent. Guys, Ray slammed his hand on the table. Enough, he bellowed. The room went quiet again. Denise walked back to her seat, clutching my keys like a trophy. I stood there, humiliated, my hand still outstretched, surrounded by family who looked at me like I was a contagion. Ray picked up a single sheet of paper from the table. He adjusted his reading glasses. We have consulted with advisors, Ray said. Since you are not our blood, and since we have supported you under false pretenses for 3 decades, we are seeking restitution. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw zero love, I saw zero conflict, I saw only greed. I have an itemized list of costs incurred by the Coleman household for your upbringing. Ray said, food, clothing, shelter, medical expenses, the braces you got in 2008, the prom dress from 2011, the college tuition assistance. I paid back the tuition, I screamed. I have the bank statements. It adds up, Ray said, talking over me, loud and booming, to a total of $512,000. The number echoed in the high ceilings of the Briarstone room. $512,000. He slid the paper across the tablecloth toward the edge of the table. Next to it, he placed a black pen. You are going to sign a promissory note, Ray said. You are going to acknowledge this debt. You are 30 years old today. Gracie, you are legally liable. We are not asking for it all today, but you will sign, and you will start a payment plan. It is the only way we do not take this to the police for fraud." "Fraud?" I whispered. "I was a child. How could I commit fraud when I was a child?" "You knew," Denise hissed. "Somehow. You knew. You never fit in." I looked at the paper. It was absurd. It was insanity. But as I looked up at the faces in the crowd, I realized the true horror of the situation. No one was laughing. No one was standing up to say, "Ray, you are crazy. Sit down." My cousin Sarah was nodding. Her lips pursed. My Uncle Mike was looking at the ceiling, pretending he was not there, but he was not stopping it. They had been prepped. They had been told a story before I arrived. Ray and Denise had poisoned the well so thoroughly that even if I had screamed the truth until my throat bled, they would only hear the desperate lies of an imposter. I felt a wave of nausea. The walls of the room felt like they were closing in. I looked toward the double doors, thinking about running. I could run. I could leave the keys, leave the family, just run into the night. But near the exit, standing in the shadows by the emergency door, I saw something that made me freeze. There was a man standing there. He did not belong, in a room full of off-the-rack suits and floral department store dresses. He looked like he had stepped out of a magazine spread or a Senate hearing. He was tall, wearing a charcoal suit that fit him with the kind of precision that costs more than my annual salary. He had silver gray hair and a posture that was rigid, alert. Next to him stood a woman, younger, severe-looking, holding a thick black binder against her chest. The man was not looking at Ray. He was not looking at Kinsley's phone. He was looking at me. His expression was unreadable. He wasn't judging. He wasn't pitying. He looked impatient. He glanced at his wristwatch, a heavy silver piece, and then looked back at me. He nodded, almost imperceptibly, as if checking a box on a list. "Gracie!" Ray barked, snapping my attention back to the table. "Sign the paper, now, or we call the police and tell them you stole the car." I looked back at Ray, the man who taught me to ride a bike, the man who walked me down the aisle at my high school graduation. He looked at me with such venom that I physically recoiled. "You want me to sign my life away?" I asked, my voice trembling. "On my birthday?" "It is the least you can do," Denise said, "after what you took from us." I looked at the pen. It was a cheap, blue ballpoint, the kind you get for free at the bank. If I signed it, I was admitting guilt. I was accepting a debt that would cripple me forever. If I didn't sign it, they would call the cops. They would ruin my career. A nurse with a grand theft auto charge loses her license. They knew that. They had weaponized my own life against me. The trap was perfect. I stepped forward. My hand shook as I reached for the pen. Kinsley moved the phone closer, eager to capture the money shot of my defeat. "I don't have $500,000, I whispered. "Then you work for us until you do," Ray said, a cruel smile touching his lips. My fingers brushed the cool plastic of the pen. I felt tears pricking my eyes. Not tears of sadness, but tears of absolute frustration. I was cornered. Suddenly, a deep voice cut through the room. It was not loud, but it carried a weight that Ray's microphone-amplified voice lacked. It was a voice of absolute authority. "Not yet. Ray." The silence that followed was different from the silence when I entered. That first silence had been heavy with judgment. This silence was sharp with shock. I froze, my hand hovering over the paper. Ray's head snapped up. Denise looked toward the back of the room, her mouth falling open. Kinsley spun around, the ring light swinging wildly, illuminating the dust motes in the air. We all looked at the emergency exit. The man in the charcoal suit took one step forward out of the shadows. He did not look at the family. He kept his eyes locked on mine. He didn't look like a savior. He looked like a hunter who had just sprung a trap of his own. "Who the hell are you?" Ray demanded, though his voice wavered. "This is a private event." The man ignored him. He checked his watch again, then looked at the woman with the binder. "Is it time?" he asked her. The woman nodded once. It is time. I looked from Ray to the stranger. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I realized then that the itemized bill, the DNA test, the humiliation, it was all just the surface. Something far darker, something far older, was moving beneath the floorboards of the Briarstone room. Ray tried to grab the paper back, but my hand was already on it. I looked at the stranger, and for the first time that night, the fear in my chest was replaced by something else, a cold, hard curiosity. The man in the suit smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "Ray," the man said, his voice dropping an octave, sounding like rocks grinding together. "You really should have read the fine print before you started this circus." I lowered my hand. I did not pick up the pen. I looked at Ray. He was pale. I looked at the stranger, and I knew that my life as Gracie Coleman ended the moment I walked through those doors. But whatever was starting now, it was going to be violent. 4 weeks before the world fell out from under my feet, I was standing in the break room at Cedar Ridge Medical Center, staring at the bottom of a stale pot of coffee. It was 7 in the morning. My shift had technically ended 45 minutes ago, but I was still charting. The hum of the ICU was a sound that lived in my bones, the rhythmic beeping of cardiac monitors, the hiss of ventilators, the squeak of rubber shoes on linoleum. I loved it here. The hospital made sense. In the ICU, if you followed the protocols and paid attention to the details, you could usually fix things, or, at the very least, you understood why they were breaking. My phone vibrated against the hard plastic of the table. I rubbed my eyes, which felt like they were full of sand, and looked at the screen. It was Kinsley. I hesitated. A call from my sister usually meant one of two things. Either she needed money, or she needed a ride because she had left her car somewhere she should not have. I took a deep breath, put on my big sister voice, and answered. "Hey, Kins," I said. "Is everything okay?" "Gracie, you are going to die," she shrieked. The volume was so loud, I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "I am actually hoping to go home and sleep. Not die," I said, leaning back in the chair. "What is going on?" "Okay, so I'm not supposed to tell you," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that she was terrible at maintaining. "But Mom and Dad are planning something huge." I frowned. "Planning something for what? For your birthday?" "Dummy. The big 30. I went still. My birthday was a month away. For the last 29 years, my birthday had been treated with the same enthusiasm the Colemans reserved for tax day, an obligation that was best gotten over with quickly and cheaply. "What do you mean?" I asked. "A party. Gracie, a real one. At the Briarstone room?" I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Kinsley, stop it. Mom and Dad would never pay for the Briarstone. That place has a waiting list and a rental fee that costs more than my rent." "They are doing it," Kinsley insisted. "Mom said it is a milestone. They want to make it up to you. For, being so busy all the time, it is going to be a surprise. So act surprised, okay? But get a nice dress. Like, a really nice dress." She hung up before I could ask any follow-up questions. I sat there in the empty break room, staring at my reflection in the dark window. The woman staring back looked tired. My scrubs were wrinkled. My hair was pulled back in a messy bun that was starting to come loose. A surprise party. The idea felt foreign, like trying to speak a language I had never heard. Growing up, the narrative in the Coleman house was always about scarcity. We were always just getting by. We were always tightening our belts, but the belt only seemed to tighten around my waist. I remembered my 16th birthday. I had wanted to go to the movies with 3 friends. Denise had sat me down at the kitchen table, her face grave, and told me that the electric bill was higher than expected that month. She said we had to make sacrifices for the family. We had a frozen pizza at home instead. 2 years later, for Kinsley's 16th, there was a DJ. There was a rented tent in the backyard. When I asked about the budget then, Ray had just shrugged and said business was looking up. Business was always looking up for Kinsley and looking down for me. I stood up and rinsed my coffee mug in the sink. I should have been suspicious. I should have realized that leopards do not change their spots. They just learn to hunt better in the tall grass. But I was tired. I was lonely. And I wanted, so desperately, to believe them. I drove home that morning thinking about the money I had sent them over the years. It was a habit I had formed as soon as I got my first paycheck as a nursing assistant. I was 18, making minimum wage, and Ray had mentioned he was short on the car insurance. I wrote him a check for $200. It made me feel useful. It made me feel like I was buying my place in the house. That $200 turned into $500 for an unexpected dental bill, then $1,000 for a roof repair, then the monthly payments for the RAV4, which Denise insisted they needed for family errands, but ended up being my car because they claimed the insurance rates were better if it was bundled. I paid the note. I paid the insurance. I paid for the oil changes. By my calculation, I had transferred nearly 40% of my take-home pay to Ray and Denise for the last 8 years. I lived in a studio apartment the size of a shoebox. I shopped at discount grocery stores. I picked up extra shifts on holidays for the double time. I did it because I thought that was what families did. They supported each other. If they were throwing me a party at the Briarstone, maybe they were finally saying thank you. The following week, the stakes got higher. I was in the office of Brenda Miller, the director of nursing at Cedar Ridge. Brenda was a tough woman who had started as a field medic in the Army. She did not give compliments easily. "Gracie," she said, tapping a file on her desk, "you know the clinical lead position for the ICU is opening up next quarter." I nodded. I knew. I had been eyeing that position for 2 years. "I am applying." "Brenda, good," she said. "You are shortlisted. Your patient care metrics are the best on the floor. Your charting is impeccable. But you are up against 2 external candidates who have master's degrees." I felt my heart sink. I was still finishing my master's at night. "However," Brenda continued, leaning forward, "we place a lot of weight on character references and community standing. The hospital board is looking for someone who represents Cedar Ridge well." "I saw in your file that your father is Ray Coleman?" "Yes," I said, surprised. "He sits on the subcommittee for the county fundraising gala, right?" "He knows Dr. Sterling and the other board members." I hesitated. Ray liked to brag about his connections, but I never really knew how deep they went. "He volunteers for the committee. Yes, if you could get a letter of recommendation from him, specifically highlighting your character and your family's commitment to the community, it would go a long way." Brenda said, "It sounds old-fashioned, but the board loves legacy. They love a local family story." I walked out of her office with my head spinning. I needed a favor, a big one. I called Ray that evening. My hands were sweating as I held the phone. Asking my father for help usually resulted in a lecture about how I should be more independent, followed by a request for a loan. "Dad?" I said when he picked up. "Do you have a minute?" "Make it quick." "Gracie," Ray said. He sounded distracted, like he was watching television. I explained the situation. I told him about the promotion, the raise, the title. I told him that Brenda suggested a letter from him would tip the scales in my favor because of his work with the gala. I waited for the sigh. I waited for the excuse. Instead, Ray's voice changed. It brightened. "Clinical lead?" he asked. "That comes with a significant salary increase. Does it not?" "Yes," I said. "It is a big step up. And you need a letter from me? To the board?" "Yes. Just saying that I am, a hard worker. That I am a good person." There was a pause. Then Ray chuckled. It was a warm sound I had not heard directed at me in years. "Gracie, I would be honored," he said. "In fact, I can do better than that. I will write the letter, but I will not just mail it. I will present it to you." "Present it?" I asked. "At the party," he said. He did not even pretend it was a surprise anymore. "We are doing something special for your 30th. I will read the letter in front of the family. We will show everyone how proud we are of you. It will be the perfect send-off into your new decade." I felt tears prick my eyes. I sat down on my cheap IKEA couch and pressed the phone to my forehead. "Thank you. Dad, that means everything to me." Do not mention it, Ray said. Just make sure you look the part. Wear something that says success. I hung up feeling lighter than I had in a decade. They were proud of me. They wanted to show me off. All the money, all the sacrifices, all the missed events because I was working. It was finally paying off. We were going to be a real family. The next 3 weeks were a blur of nervous excitement. I broke my own rule about frugality. I went to a boutique downtown, not the clearance rack at the department store. I found a dress. It was navy blue, silk, with a high neck and a low back. It was elegant. It looked like the kind of dress a clinical lead would wear. It cost $400. And for the first time, I swiped my debit card without feeling guilty, but I wanted to do more. I did not want to just show up and take their praise. I wanted to show them that I saw their effort. I decided to make an album. I spent my evenings on the floor of my living room, surrounded by boxes of old photographs I had scavenged from the closet the last time I visited home. I wanted to chronicle the 30 years of the Coleman family. It was harder than I expected. As I sifted through the stacks, I noticed things I had ignored before. There were dozens of photos of Kinsley at dance recital, Kinsley at camp, Kinsley blowing out candles on a massive cake. The photos of me were sparse. There was one of me at age 7, standing in the background while Ray held Kinsley on his shoulders. There was one of me at high school graduation, but Ray and Denise were looking away, talking to someone else. I pushed the unease down. I told myself I was being sensitive. I cropped the photos. I used nice paper. I wrote captions in my best calligraphy. Family first. The roots that ground us. Coleman strong. I found a picture from when I was a baby. It was just me in a crib. I looked at it for a long time. I did not look like either of them. Not really. I had dark eyes. They both had blue. I had olive skin. They burned in the sun. But people say babies look like potatoes. So I glued it onto the first page. I poured my heart into that album. I wanted it to be a bridge. I wanted to hand it to them after Ray read his letter. A physical symbol that the debt was paid, that the struggle was over, that we were solid. 2 days before the party, I picked up the finished album from the binder. It was heavy. It felt substantial. I drove to the hospital for my final shift before the weekend. I felt capable. I felt ready. I ran into Dr. Aris in the hallway. He was the head intensivist, a brilliant man who terrified the residents but respected the nurses. Heard you are up for the lead spot. Coleman, he said, pausing while reviewing a chart. Yes, sir, I said. Good, he grunted. You have good instincts. You do not panic. That is rare. He walked away. I stood there, beaming. I had the respect of my colleagues. I was about to have the public support of my family. I had a $400 dress hanging in my closet. On the afternoon of my birthday, I spent 2 hours getting ready. I curled my hair. I applied makeup with a precision I usually reserved for inserting IV lines. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman who was finally arriving. I drove to the Briarstone room with the photo album wrapped in silver paper on the passenger seat. I listened to upbeat music. I tapped my steering wheel. I imagined the scene. I would walk in. Kinsley would yell surprise. Ray would hug me. Denise would maybe tear up. Ray would tap the glass. Read the letter. And the room would applaud. I would give them the album. We would eat cake. I pulled into the parking lot. It was full. I saw my aunt's minivan. I saw my uncle's truck. They were all there. I checked my lipstick in the rearview mirror one last time. I took a deep breath, grabbed the silver package, and stepped out into the cool evening air. I walked toward the double doors of the Briarstone room, my heart full of a naive, stupid hope. I was bringing them a tribute to our love. I had no idea I was walking into a slaughterhouse. I had no idea that the man I had just spent 3 weeks eulogizing as a pillar of the community was waiting on the other side of that wood to strip me of my name. I reached for the handle. I smiled. And I opened the door. The unease did not start with a shout. It started with a whisper in the database. 2 weeks before the party, right after Ray had promised me the letter of recommendation, I received an automated email from the Human Resources Department at Cedar Ridge. It was a standard compliance flag, the kind that usually meant a certification was expiring or a flu shot record needed updating. I opened it between rounds, sipping a lukewarm bottle of water. Subject: Identity verification, mismatch. Action required. I frowned. I had worked at Cedar Ridge for 6 years. My identity was not a mystery. I clicked the link, expecting a glitch. The system highlighted my social security number and my birth certificate on file. The error code was specific. Source document discrepancy. I called HR immediately. Janice, the administrator, sounded confused. It is probably nothing. Gracie, she said, her typing clicking in the background, but the system is flagging a mismatch between the birth date on your SSN application and the birth certificate copy we have on file. It is a matter of hours, maybe a day. But for the clinical lead background check, everything has to be perfect. Do you have the original birth certificate? The one with the raised seal? I paused. I did not. I never had. My parents, Ray and Denise, had always held on to my important papers. When I turned 18 and moved out for nursing school, I asked for my birth certificate. Ray had told me a story I had accepted as gospel truth. He said the original was lost in the basement flooding during the Great Storm of 2006. He gave me a photocopy instead, saying it was all the county could provide because the courthouse had flooded too. I will get it. Janice, I said, I will go to the county clerk myself. That night, I sat at my laptop. I was not suspicious yet, just annoyed. I needed to verify the date of the flood so I could explain the situation to the clerk if they asked why I needed a reissue. I typed Asheville weather history and the year 2006 into the search bar. I scrolled. I refreshed the page. I checked 3 different meteorological archive sites. There was no flood in 2006. There was not even a severe thunderstorm warning that year. The precipitation levels were below average. The basement could not have flooded from a storm that never happened. A cold prickle of heat started at the back of my neck. It was a small lie. I told myself, maybe Ray got the year wrong. Maybe a pipe burst and he just called it a storm to make it sound less like negligence. Parents rewrite history all the time. But the nurse in me, the part of me trained to notice when a patient's heart rate drifts just a few beats out of rhythm, could not let it go. The next morning, I went down to the hospital archives. I wanted to see my immunization records. I needed to see a paper trail that predated my memory. If the birth certificate was a photocopy of a lie, surely the medical records were real. I found my file in the basement storage, where the old paper charts from the 90s were kept before digitization. The folder was yellowed, the edges soft like felt. I opened it. There were the dates: polio, MMR, tetanus. But at the top of the intake form, dated shortly after my birth, under the section for parent/guardian status, a box was checked. It was not natural child. It was not adopted. It was a handwritten note in blue ink, faded but legible. Guardianship placement, pending legal finalization. I stared at the words. Guardianship placement. That was a term used for foster care, or temporary custody, or ward of the state arrangements. It was not the term used for a child born to a married couple in a suburban home. Hey, Gracie? I jumped, slamming the file shut. Betty, one of the senior archivists, was standing at the end of the aisle. She was a small woman with glasses thick as bottle bottoms. She looked at the file in my hand, then up at my face. She did not smile. Digging into the old days? She asked. Just checking a date for HR. I lied. My voice sounded too high. Betty walked closer. She lowered her voice, even though we were alone in the basement. Be careful with those old files, she said. What do you mean? Back in the early 90s, she whispered, looking over her shoulder. The administration was different. There were a few doctors, a few lawyers in town. They had arrangements. Sometimes paperwork was cleaned up to make things easier for certain families, to avoid the red tape of the state. My mouth went dry. What kind of arrangements? The kind where money moved faster than the law, Betty said. She reached out and tapped the file. If you find something that does not make sense, Gracie, do not ask the people who wrote it. They will only protect the lie. Ask the paper. The paper does not forget." She walked away, leaving me standing in the dust motes with my heart hammering against my ribs. I left the hospital and drove straight to the county clerk's office. I needed the truth. I needed to see the original birth certificate, the one Ray said had drowned in a phantom flood. The clerk was a young man with a bored expression. He chewed gum as I handed him my driver's license. "I need a certified copy of my birth certificate." I said, "Gracie Coleman, date of birth, October 24th, 1993. He typed it in. Click, clack, click. He stopped chewing. He frowned at the screen. He hit the enter key again. Harder this time. "That is weird," he muttered. "What?" I asked, leaning forward against the glass partition. He turned the monitor slightly away from me, a reflexive action of bureaucracy protecting itself. "I cannot access this," he said. "What do you mean you cannot access it? Is the system down?" "No," he said. He looked at me, and his boredom was gone, replaced by a nervous wariness. "It is flagged. It says sealed by court order." "Sealed?" I repeated. "That is for closed adoptions or witness protection. I am just Gracie Coleman. My parents are Ray and Denise Coleman." The clerk stood up. "I cannot help you, ma'am. You have to file a petition with the Superior Court to unseal a file like this. We do not even have a digital image of it. It is physically vaulted. But I need it for work," I pleaded. "I am sorry," he said. And he sounded like he meant it. But he also sounded like he wanted me to leave immediately. "You should ask your parents. Usually, if it is sealed, the guardians have the docket number." I walked out of the courthouse into the bright, blinding sunshine of Asheville. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys. Sealed, flagged, guardianship, no storm. The picture of my life, the one I had just spent 3 weeks pasting into a photo album, was dissolving. It was not a picture. It was a collage of fabrications glued together with money and silence. That evening, I returned to my apartment. I felt paranoid. Every car that drove past seemed to slow down. Every glance from a neighbor felt weighted. I unlocked my door and froze. Lying on my welcome mat, right in the center, was a plain white envelope. There was no stamp. There was no return address. Just my name. Gracie. Handwritten in block letters. I picked it up. The paper felt expensive. Heavy cotton bond. I brought it inside and locked the door behind me. Engaging the deadbolt and the chain, I opened it. Inside was a single index card. The message was typed, not handwritten. "Do not sign anything on your birthday." That was it. No explanation, no signature, just 7 words that turned my confusion into terror. Who knew? Who knew that my birthday was coming? Who knew that there was something to sign? Ray had mentioned the letter of recommendation. Was I supposed to sign for that? No. You do not sign a recommendation letter. I sat on the floor, my back against the door. I thought about the DNA test Ray had mentioned in the future, the one I had not seen yet, the one that would appear on the table at the Briarstone. I thought about the money I had sent them. I pulled out my phone. I began to scroll through my text history with Ray and Denise. I needed evidence. If I was going crazy, I needed to prove it. If I was not going crazy, I needed to protect myself. I saw the text from Ray asking for my bank routing number 2 years ago to transfer a gift that never arrived. I saw the text from Denise asking for my social security number because the accountant needs it for the family trust taxes. I had given it to her. I had given them everything. I took screenshots, hundreds of them. I saved them to a cloud folder that was not linked to my primary email. I named the folder Recipes to hide it. Then, my phone buzzed in my hand. It was Kinsley. "Hey, sissy. So excited for tomorrow. Can you get to the Briarstone like 30 minutes early?" I stared at the screen. "Why?" "The lighting is better then." Kinsley wrote back. "And I want to set up my tripod to get your genuine reaction when you walk in. It is going to be such good content. Please, do it for me." A chill went through me. Content. My 30th birthday. My milestone. To Kinsley, it was just content, but the text felt desperate. It felt orchestrated. Get her there early. Get her in position. I typed back. Sure, I will be there. I put the phone down. I looked at the anonymous note again. Do not sign anything. Someone was warning me. Someone knew that the party was a trap. I went to my closet and pulled out the navy blue dress. It hung there, looking like a shroud. I touched the silk. I had bought this dress to be celebrated. Now, I felt like I was wearing armor for a battle I did not understand. I needed a plan. I could not just walk in there blind. If they were planning something, if the cleaned-up files and the sealed records and the fake storm were all connected, then my word against theirs would mean nothing. They were the respected Colemans. I was just Gracie, the one who owed them everything. I needed a witness, but I could not bring anyone. It was a family event. I looked at my phone. The voice memo app. I tested it. I set the phone to record, slipped it into the small clutch purse I intended to carry. The microphone picked up my breathing from inside the bag. It was sensitive enough. I would record it. I would record every happy birthday, every toast, every lie. The next 24 hours were an exercise in suffocation. I went to work, but I could not focus. I avoided the basement. I avoided Betty. When the evening of the party finally arrived, I did not feel festive. I felt like I was walking to the gallows. I drove to the Briarstone. I parked my car, the RAV4 that Denise claimed they owned, away from the main entrance. Under a flickering street lamp, I checked my makeup in the mirror. I looked pale. I pinched my cheeks to bring some color back. I had to look happy. I had to play the part of the oblivious daughter until the trap sprung. I reached into my bag and tapped the red button on the screen. 0 hours, 0 minutes, 1 second. The numbers started climbing. I closed the bag. I got out of the car. The air was crisp. I could hear the faint sound of traffic from the highway. As I walked toward the entrance, I saw a shadow move near the side of the building. I stopped. It was a man in a dark suit, smoking a cigarette. He saw me, dropped the cigarette, and crushed it out with the heel of an expensive shoe. He did not wave. He just watched me. It was the man I would later see inside. The man with the watch. My stomach twisted. I walked to the double doors. I put my hand on the brass handle. Do not sign anything, the note had said. I took a breath that shuddered in my lungs. Okay, I thought, let us see what you have written for me. I pushed the door open, and the recording ran on, silent and unseen, capturing the sound of my life shattering. The week leading up to the Briarstone ambush was a masterclass in psychological warfare, though at the time, I only recognized it as the peculiar, suffocating anxiety that always accompanied my interactions with the Colemans. If the missing birth certificate and the anonymous note were the smoke. The phone calls I received 7 days before my birthday were the fire. It began on a Tuesday. I was sleeping off a night shift, the kind of deep, coma-like sleep that only ICU nurses and new parents understand. When my phone rang, it was Denise. I fumbled for the device, squinting at the harsh light of the screen. Hello? I rasped, my voice thick with sleep. Gracie, wake up, Denise said. She did not say hello. She did not ask how my shift was. Her voice was brisk, efficient, the tone of a woman checking items off a grocery list. I am working on the family heritage display for the party. The extended family is coming, remember? I sat up, rubbing my temples. Yes, Mom, I remember. I need you to bring your physical Social Security card and your driver's license to the house tonight, she said. I blinked, trying to process the request through the fog of exhaustion. What? Why? I told you, she said, her impatience spiking immediately. For the display. I am scanning everyone's documents to make a collage about our American roots. It is going to be very artistic. Aunt Marlene is bringing hers. I frowned. The idea was nonsensical. Who puts a Social Security card in a photo album? It was dangerous. It was reckless. Mom, I said, fully awake now. That is a security risk. I cannot just put my social on a poster board. Identity theft is real. Do not lecture me. Gracie, she snapped. The sudden aggression took me aback. Why do you always have to be so difficult? We are doing this nice thing for you, spending thousands of dollars, and you cannot do one simple thing to help me complete the vision? Just bring the card. Or at least text me a picture of the front and back right now. The demand was so urgent, so out of proportion to the task, that the hairs on my arms stood up. I cannot, I said, keeping my voice steady. I left it in my safe deposit box at the bank. I cannot get to it until the weekend. There was a silence on the other end. A long, heavy silence. Fine, she said. The word clipped and cold. Just make sure you bring it to the party. We can scan it there. She hung up before I could say goodbye. I stared at the phone. My mother wanted my government identification for a collage. It was a lie. It was a clumsy, desperate lie. But why? She knew my birthday. She knew my full name. What could she possibly need the physical card for that she could not do with just the numbers? Unless she needed to prove I was who she said I was to a third party. 2 hours later, Ray called. "Hey, kiddo," he said. He sounded jovial. The complete opposite of Denise. "Just wrapping up some details for the big night. Listen, send me your bank routing number and account number." I froze in my kitchen, a half-eaten bagel in my hand. "Why? Dad?" "Refunds," he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. A few relatives sent cash gifts to my account by mistake because they wanted to contribute to the party fund. But I told them, "No, this is Gracie's day, so I want to wire the surplus directly to you. It is a nice chunk of change." The alarm bells in my head were now deafening sirens. People do not accidentally send money to the wrong bank account, and Ray Coleman never, in the history of his life, turned down free money. "Just write me a check." "Dad," I said, "or use Zelle. You have my number." No, the wire is faster," he insisted. "I want it to be there for your birthday morning. Just text me the numbers." I felt a wave of nausea. They were hunting. They were probing the perimeter of my life, looking for a way in. "Dad," I said, lying through my teeth, "I actually just switched banks. I do not have the new numbers memorized yet. I will let you know." He did not push it, but the jovial tone evaporated instantly. "Well, do not wait too long," he muttered. "Time is money." The hammer dropped on Thursday. I was at the pharmacy picking up a prescription when my phone buzzed with a fraud alert from my credit monitoring app. I had installed it years ago after a data breach at a retailer, and I rarely checked it. Alert. New inquiry. I opened the app. My hands started to shake. Applicant: Gracie Marie Coleman. Lender: Quick Cash Personal Loans. Amount: $50,000. Someone was trying to take out a high-interest personal loan in my name. The application had been submitted 20 minutes ago. I dialed the bank immediately. I stood in the pharmacy aisle, surrounded by bottles of aspirin, feeling like I was having a heart attack. "This is Gracie Coleman," I told the fraud specialist. "I did not apply for a loan." "Stop it. Freeze everything. We caught it." "Ms. Coleman," the agent said, "the applicant had your social, your address, and your date of birth, but they failed the security question about your previous employer." My knees went weak. They had my social. Denise. She must have found it in old tax returns or school papers she had kept. "Who did this?" I asked. "Can you trace the IP address?" "We will investigate." The agent said, "But I recommend you lock your credit immediately." I did it right there in the aisle. I tapped the screen, locking down my financial identity at all 3 bureaus. I felt violated. I felt sick. I walked out to my car and sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I needed to know. I needed to look Ray in the eye and see if he flinched. I called him. "Dad," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "Someone just tried to take out a $50,000 loan in my name." There was no gasp. There was no, "Oh my God, are you okay?" There was a pause, followed by a sharp intake of breath. "Did it go through?" Ray asked. The question hung in the air like toxic smoke. He did not ask who did it. He asked if it succeeded. "No," I said, my voice turning to ice. "I caught it. I froze my credit. The police are tracing the IP address." That was a bluff. but I wanted to hear his reaction. You should not involve the police, Ray said quickly. His voice was high. Panicked. It is probably just a glitch. Banks make mistakes all the time. You do not want to file a false report. It looks bad on your record. Since when does being a victim of identity theft look bad on my record? I asked. Just calm down. Gracie, Ray said, his tone shifting to anger. You are always so dramatic. Just bring your papers to the party. We will sort everything out then. You are turning 30. It is a legal milestone. We need to make sure your affairs are in order. A legal milestone. He kept saying that. Not a biological milestone, not a personal one, a legal one. I hung up on him. I sat there, watching the traffic pass on the highway, and I realized with absolute clarity that my parents were not just bad with money, they were predators, and I was the prey. On Friday, Kinsley texted me, "Hey, I secured a tentative brand deal with a tissue company for the party video." I stared at the message. A tissue company? They want emotional release. Kinsley typed, like, real tears. So when you see the surprise, do not hold back, okay? If you cry, the engagement goes up, and I get a bonus. I will split it with you. I wanted to throw my phone out the window. She was selling my tears. She was monetizing my humiliation before it even happened. Kinsley, I typed back, I am not an actor. Just drink some wine before you come in. She replied, it helps with the waterworks. Also, Dad says to make sure you look expensive. No scrubs energy? I did not reply. I felt a cold resolve settling over me. They wanted a show? Fine, I would give them a show. But it would not be the one they were selling to a tissue brand. Saturday morning, the day before the party, I drove to my parents' house. I needed to drop off a box of old decorations Denise had asked for, another pretext to get me over there. I assumed. I parked down the street. I walked up the driveway quietly. The front door was unlocked. It usually was. Ray always said locks were for people who had something to steal, and he claimed he had nothing. I stepped into the foyer. I heard voices in the kitchen. It was Denise and Ray. They were arguing. She's going to ask questions. Ray, Denise said. Her voice was shrill. She is not stupid. She does not have a choice. Ray's voice rumbled. I talked to the lawyer. Once she turns 30, the trust creates a disbursement window. If she does not sign the waiver transferring the management rights to us before midnight on her birthday, the control goes to her directly. We lose the house. We lose the cars. We lose everything. Trust? I stood frozen in the hallway, clutching the box of decorations. What trust? We were broke. We had always been broke. She just needs to sign the promissory note, Denise said. If she acknowledges the debt, we can leverage that against the trust assets. We can drain it legally as reimbursement. Just need her to sign. Ray said, then it is done. We are free. I stepped back. My heart hammering so hard, I thought they would hear it. A trust. There was money. Real money. Money that they were terrified I would touch. Money that was mine. I turned around and walked out of the house. I left the box on the porch. I got back in my car and drove 2 blocks away before pulling over and hyperventilating. They had stolen my childhood. Now they were trying to steal my future, and they were using a fake debt to do it. I needed advice. I could not afford a lawyer. Not yet. But I had Sarah. Sarah was my best friend from nursing school, who had burned out and gone to work as a paralegal for a corporate firm in Charlotte. I called her, my voice trembling. Sarah, I need you to listen to me, and I need you to not ask me if I'm crazy. I told her everything, the missing birth certificate, the note, the loan attempt, the overheard conversation about the trust and the waiver. Gracie, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a serious. Professional register. You are in danger. Not physical danger. Maybe, but legal danger. They are trying to execute a constructive fraud. What do I do? I asked. Do I skip the party? No, Sarah said. If you skip it, they might forge your signature, if they are desperate enough to try a loan online. They are desperate enough to fake a document. You need to go. You need to be seen. But you need to follow 3 rules. Tell me. I said, 1. Sarah said, do not drink. Not a drop. They might try to say you were impaired if you fight them later. 2. Do not sign anything. Not a birthday card. Not a guest book. Certainly not a legal document. If they put a pen in your hand, drop it. And 3? 3? Sarah said, have an exit strategy. If they corner you, you leave. Do not argue. Do not explain. You just walk. I spent the rest of Saturday preparing for war. I downloaded a rideshare app and preloaded my credit card. I did not trust Ray or Denise not to block my car in the driveway. I needed to be able to summon a car to the front door of the Briarstone in 3 minutes. I turned on the permanent location sharing on my phone and sent the link to Sarah. If I stop moving for more than an hour, I texted her. Call the police. I will. She replied. Good luck. Gracie, do not let them break you. I looked at myself in the mirror of my apartment. I practiced my face. I practiced the look of the grateful, oblivious daughter. I practiced the smile that did not reach my eyes. I would go to the Briarstone. I would wear the navy dress. I would walk into their trap. But I would not be the victim they expected. I was an ICU nurse. I dealt with trauma every day. I knew how to stop a bleed. I knew how to restart a heart. And I knew how to look death in the face and not blink. I whispered to my reflection. A vow that felt more sacred than any prayer I had ever said. I will not kneel. I went to bed early, but I did not sleep. I lay in the dark, listening to the wind rattle the window pane, waiting for the sun to rise on the day that would end my life as I knew it. The next evening, as I stood outside the doors of the Briarstone room, clutching my purse with the recording phone inside, I remembered the conversation in the kitchen. Just need her to sign. I touched the cold metal of the door handle. Not tonight. I thought, tonight, the pen stays on the table. I pushed the doors open. The interruption from the man in the charcoal suit had acted like a defibrillator shock to the room, a momentary, violent reset of the rhythm. But Ray Coleman was determined to restart his own pulse. He glared at the stranger near the exit, his jaw working, but he clearly decided that the fastest way to remove the intruder was to finish the execution he had started. Ray turned his back on the man and leveled his eyes at me. He adjusted his stance, widening his feet like a prosecutor addressing a jury he had already bribed. The silence in the Briarstone room was thick, viscous. I would advise you to listen. Gracie, Ray said, his voice regaining its boom. We are not here to play games with guests. We are here to settle accounts. He snapped the red folder open again. He did not just read from it. He performed it. Exhibit A. He announced, though he did not use those words. The tone was implied. DNA analysis from Helix Verify Labs. Probability of paternity, 0%. Probability of maternity, 0%. He looked at the aunts and uncles, nodding solemnly. We took you in, Ray said, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. We fed you. We clothed you. We gave you the Coleman name because we are good. Christian people. And how do you repay us? By taking up resources that should have gone to our own flesh and blood. By demanding cars. By demanding tuition. I stood perfectly still. My training as an ICU nurse took over. In the unit, when a patient is coding, you do not scream, you do not cry. You become a machine of observation and action. You check the monitor, you check the lines, you find the bleed. I checked my internal monitor. Heart rate, elevated but steady. Breathing, controlled. Fear, present, but compartmentalized. I looked at Kinsley. She was zooming in on my face, desperate for a tear. She wanted the mascara smudge. She wanted the breakdown that would sell facial tissue. I gave her nothing. I relaxed my facial muscles. I stared at Ray with a flat, bored expression. Ray noticed. The lack of reaction agitated him. He wanted me on my knees. Denise stepped in to assist. She walked to the edge of the table, her hands gripping the white cloth. We sacrificed our lifestyle for you, she said, her voice trembling with practiced martyrdom. Do you know how many vacations we skipped? Do you know how many times Kinsley had to go without because we had to buy you textbooks? I thought about the 40% of my paycheck I had sent them for 8 years. I thought about the vacations they took to Florida while I worked double shifts. You owe us, Denise hissed. You are a bad investment, Gracie, and we are calling in the loan. Ray reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was heavy, legal-sized. He slid it across the table toward me. It moved smoothly over the linen, stopping right in front of the cheap blue pen. This is a promissory note, Ray said. It acknowledges a debt of $512,000, payable over 10 years at 6% interest. Kinsley moved the phone closer, ensuring the document was in frame. Sign it, Ray commanded. Sign it, and we forget the fraud charges. Sign it, and you can walk out of here and keep your stolen name. I looked at the paper. It was not a standard bank form. It looked like something downloaded from a legal template site. I took a breath. I did not look at the pen. I looked at Ray. DNA tests work by comparison. Ray, I said. My voice was calm, clear, carrying to the back of the room without a microphone. To prove I am not yours, you compare my sample to yours. But to prove who I am, or to prove that I am an orphan who owes you for my existence, you need another sample. Ray blinked. He had expected begging. He had not expected science. What are you talking about? He snapped. The results are right there. I am asking a procedural question. I said, taking a small step forward. If I am not yours, then who did you test me against to confirm that I have no other family? Who is the control sample? Ray's eyes darted to the side. He answered too quickly. It was a reflex, a defensive spasm. Your real parents are dead, he blurted out. They died in a car wreck before we took you in. There is no one else. The room went deadly quiet. Even Kinsley lowered her phone slightly. I tilted my head. Dead? I asked. Dead and buried, Ray said, gaining confidence. Tragic accident. We saved you from the system. I let the silence stretch for 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. Then how did you get their DNA sample? I asked. The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Someone in the back row coughed. A chair squeaked. If they have been dead for 30 years, Ray, I continued, my voice sharpening, cutting through the humidity of the room. Did you exhume a body? Did you get a court order to open a grave? Because unless you have a fresh sample from a corpse, you cannot run a paternity test against a dead man. Ray opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at the folder. He looked at Denise. The logic was simple. It was undeniable. You cannot test the dead without a lot of paperwork. And Ray Coleman was too lazy for paperwork. I looked toward the emergency exit. The man in the suit was still there. He was not looking at his watch anymore. He was looking at Ray with an expression of profound disgust. It was not the disgust of a stranger. It was the pain of someone watching a desecration. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides. Suddenly, a voice piped up from the family section. It was Aunt Marlene. She was sitting in the second row, clutching her purse to her chest. Ray, she said, her voice wavering. She sounded terrified. You said the money was from the Stubbs. Stubbs. The word seemed to act like a physical trigger for Denise. She whipped her head around, her eyes blazing. Shut up. Marlene, Denise shrieked. Do not say another word. Marlene shrank back, burying her face in her hands. I looked at Marlene, then back at Ray. Stubbs. Check stubs? Dividend stubs? Ray saw the shift in the room. He saw the doubt creeping into the faces of his captive audience. He saw the narrative slipping away. He realized that the prosecutor act was failing. So he switched to the bully. He leaned over the table, his face turning a mottled red. He pointed a finger at me. You think you are smart, do you? He sneered. You think because you went to nursing school you can talk circles around me? I think I am asking questions you cannot answer. I said, listen to me, you little ungrateful brat. Ray growled. He lowered his voice, but the microphone picked it up, broadcasting his malice to every corner of the room. You have a big promotion coming up. Do you not? Clinical lead? I went cold. I know the board members. Gracie, Ray said, his voice dripping with venom. I know Brenda Miller. I know Dr. Sterling. So? I challenged, though my stomach twisted. So, if you do not pick up that pen and sign this paper right now, Ray said, I am going to make a phone call. I am going to call Dr. Sterling personally. I am going to tell him that his candidate for clinical lead is currently under investigation for financial fraud against a senior citizen. He smiled, and it was the ugliest thing I had ever seen. I will tell them you stole from us. I will tell them you are mentally unstable. I will tell them whatever I need to tell them to ensure you are scrubbing bedpans for the rest of your life. Do you think they will hire a thief? I stared at him. This was the leverage. This was why he had been so enthusiastic about the letter of recommendation. He had not wanted to help me. He had wanted to know exactly where to aim the gun. Denise chimed in, her voice sickly sweet. Just sign it. Honey, it is just a formality. Then we can have cake. I looked at the pen. I looked at the paper. $512,000. If I signed, I was a slave to them for a decade. If I did not sign, they would torch my career by morning. I looked at Kinsley's phone. The comments were scrolling so fast now I could not read them. I looked at the man in the suit. He had taken a step forward. The woman beside him was opening her binder. Ray. The man's voice rumbled again, deeper this time. That is extortion. Ray slammed his hand on the table, making the microphone jump. I do not care who you are, Ray shouted at the stranger. Security! Get him out! No one moved. The security was just a busboy standing by the kitchen door, looking terrified. I looked Ray dead in the eye. You want me to sign? I asked softly. Yes, Ray hissed. I reached out. My hand hovered over the table. I saw the triumph flare in his eyes. He thought he had won. He thought the fear of losing my title was enough to break me. But he forgot one thing. I was an ICU nurse. I saw people lose everything every single day. And I knew that sometimes, to save the patient, you have to let the infection bleed out. I picked up the pen. Ray grinned. Denise let out a breath. Kinsley moved in for the kill shot. I held the pen up, and then I snapped it in half. Blue ink exploded over my fingers and onto the white tablecloth. I am not signing your lies. Ray, I said, my voice steady, my hands stained with the ink that looked like blood. Call the hospital. Call the police. Call the Pope. But tell me this, if my parents are dead, why is there a man standing by the door who looks like he has been waiting to kill you for the last 10 minutes? I pointed at the stranger. Ray spun around. Denise gasped, and the man in the suit finally began to walk toward us. The blue ink was still spreading across the white tablecloth. A jagged Rorschach test of my defiance, when I decided to go on the offensive. The man in the charcoal suit had stopped walking about 10 feet away, respecting the invisible boundary of the family drama, but his presence acted like a spotlight, forcing Ray to scramble for control. Ray looked at the broken pen, then at me. His face was a mask of disbelief. He was used to Gracie the doormat, Gracie the provider, Gracie the peacekeeper. He did not know what to do with Gracie the arsonist. You broke the pen, Ray said, his voice flat. He sounded like a child whose toy had been snatched away. I did not just break the pen, Ray, I said, wiping the ink from my thumb onto my dress. I ruined the script. Now, let me see that report. I did not wait for his permission. I lunged across the table. The adrenaline flooding my system made me faster than him. My fingers closed around the red folder before he could pull it back. Hey, give that back, Ray shouted, grabbing the other end. We wrestled for a second, a pathetic tug of war over my identity, before I ripped it from his grip. The papers scattered onto the table. I grabbed the top sheet, the one with the colorful bar graphs and the bold text declaring 0% paternity. I scanned the header. In the ICU, we looked at lab reports all day. We knew which labs were gold standard and which ones were factories that prioritized speed over science. My eyes locked on the logo in the top right corner. Apex Gene Solutions, LLC. I let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. Apex Gene? I asked, looking up at Ray. You used Apex Gene? It is a reputable facility, Ray sputtered, adjusting his tie. It is a mail-order scam operating out of a strip mall in Nevada, I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. We blacklisted this lab at Cedar Ridge 2 years ago. They were caught batch processing samples without cleaning the equipment between runs. They have a 40% error rate due to cross-contamination. I turned to the crowd, holding the paper up. He did not go to a doctor. I told them, he bought a coupon online. This piece of paper has less medical validity than a horoscope. You are lying, Ray screamed. He lunged forward and snatched the paper back, crumpling it against his chest. You do not need to check the details. The result is the result. The result is garbage. Ray, I said, and the fact that you will not let anyone look at the chain of custody log proves it. If it was real, you would be shoving the proof in my face, not hiding it. A murmur went through the room. I saw Uncle Mike lean over to Aunt Marlene and whisper something. Ray saw it too. He was losing the jury. Denise realized Ray was drowning, so she threw herself into the fray. She did not care about science. She cared about possession. Forget the paper, Denise shrieked. She stepped forward, shaking the car keys in my face like she was warding off a vampire. It does not matter whose blood you have. What matters is whose money you spent. She held the key fob up high, the Toyota logo catching the light from Kinsley's ring light. You see this? Denise yelled to the room. A 2022 RAV4. Leather seats, sunroof. Who do you think paid for this? The Colemans paid for this. We gave her mobility. We gave her a career. Without us, she would be taking the bus to scrub toilets. She turned on me, her eyes manic. You are nothing without us. Gracie, you are a bad investment that we are finally writing off. Give me the spare key in your purse. Now, you are walking home. The old Gracie would have handed it over. The old Gracie would have apologized for being a burden. But the old Gracie had died the moment she saw the itemized bill for her existence. I pulled out my phone. I did not unlock the car. I unlocked my banking app. I am glad you brought up the car. Mom, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous calm, because I have my transaction history right here. I tapped the screen, filtering the search results. I held the phone up to Kinsley's camera first, then turned it toward Uncle Vince and Aunt Marlene. November 1st, I read aloud, transfer to Denise Coleman, $350. Memo. Car payment. I scrolled down. October 1st, $350. Memo. Car payment. September 1st, $350. Memo. Car payment. I walked down the line of relatives, holding the glowing screen in front of their faces like a lantern. August, July, June, May. I stopped in front of Denise. I have made 48 payments to you. Mom, I said, that is $16,800. The sticker price on that RAV4 was $24,000. Plus, I paid the insurance premiums directly to the broker. I looked at the keys in her hand. If you want to repossess that car, go ahead. I said, but you will have to explain to a judge why you were collecting payments for a vehicle you claim I did not own. That is called theft by deception. And unlike a fake DNA test, bank transfers have timestamps. Denise's hand wavered. She lowered the keys slowly. Her face had gone from red to a sickly shade of gray. Vince stood up. He was a big man, slow to anger. But he looked furious. Ray, Vince said, his voice booming. Is that true? Has the girl been paying you for the car? She was contributing to the household, Ray stammered. It was rent. It says car payment on the memo line. Ray, Vince shouted, you told us you bought it for her as a graduation gift. You stood at the barbecue and bragged about it. Ray opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked trapped. I did not let up. I walked back to the table. The promissory note was still there, next to the broken pen. I picked it up. My hands were steady now. The fear had burned away, leaving only a cold, hard need for logic. I read the text. It was legal jargon, dense and repetitive, but one line stood out. Effective date: October 25th. I frowned. Today was October 24th, my birthday. Why is this dated for tomorrow? I asked. I looked at Ray. If I owe you this money for the last 30 years, why does the debt become official tomorrow? Why are you trying to get me to sign a document today that does not take effect until after midnight? Ray's eyes darted to the clock on the wall. It was 9 in the evening. It is just a clerical error, Ray said, sweating profusely. Just sign it. No, I said. It is not an error. You are rushing me. You are trying to get my signature on this paper before the clock strikes 12. Why? What happens at midnight? I looked at the document again. It wasn't just a promissory note. Buried in the third paragraph, in font size 8, was a sentence. The undersigned hereby waives all claims to any and all external assets, trusts, or inheritances not explicitly listed herein, in exchange for the forgiveness of the aforementioned debt. It was a waiver. They were not trying to get money from me. They were trying to stop me from getting money from somewhere else. I looked at Kinsley. She was staring at her phone screen, her mouth slightly open. She was not filming anymore. She was reading. What are they saying? Kinsley? I asked sharply. Kinsley jumped. She looked at me, then at Ray. They are saying do not sign it, she whispered. Read it, I commanded. Kinsley swallowed. User justice. For Gracie says, this is coercion. User Legal Eagle 88 says, that is a waiver of rights. If it is dated tomorrow, it means she ages into something at 30. Do not let her sign. She looked up at me, her influencer mask slipping. Gracie, she said, her voice trembling, they are saying Dad is trying to trick you. Ray slammed his fist on the table. Stop reading that garbage. Turn the camera off. No! Kinsley yelled back, pulling the phone away from his reach. The views are skyrocketing. We have 10,000 people watching. 10,000 witnesses, I said. I stepped closer to Kinsley. I needed one more piece of the puzzle. I needed to know how long this had been planned. Kinsley, look at me, I said. She looked at me. She looked terrified. You are always on Dad's laptop, I said. You use it to edit your videos. Yeah? She breathed. 3 months ago, I said, taking a gamble on the timeline. Around the time Dad started acting nice to me. Around the time he offered the recommendation letter. Did you see an email? I did not know if there was an email, but Ray was lazy. He did everything by email. Kinsley's eyes flickered to Ray. I do not know, she stammered. Tell the truth. Kins, I said softly. The internet is watching. Do you want to be the villain or the whistleblower? Kinsley looked at the scrolling comments. She looked at Ray, who was vibrating with rage. She made a choice. She chose the audience. I saw a notification, she said, her voice rushing out. It popped up when I was rendering the summer vlog. What did it say? I asked. It was from a law firm. She said. The subject line was, it was weird. What was it? Termination of confidentiality agreement, 30th birthday. Kinsley said. The words hung in the air like a final verdict. Termination, confidentiality, 30th birthday. The room went absolutely still. The air conditioning unit seemed to stop humming. The 75 relatives sat frozen in their folding chairs. Ray looked like he had been shot. Denise covered her mouth with her hand. I understood then. It was not just a debt. It was a contract that was expiring tonight, a contract that had kept a secret for 30 years. I turned slowly toward the emergency exit. The man in the charcoal suit took a step forward. He did not look at Ray. He did not look at the camera. He looked at me, and for the first time, his expression softened. He nodded. It was not a greeting. It was a confirmation. He walked past the busboy, past the empty dessert table, and stepped into the center of the room. The sound of his dress shoes on the hardwood floor was the only sound in the world. Ray Coleman, the man said, his voice deep and resonant. Your contract has expired. Ray shrank back against the table. Denise grabbed his arm, and then the man turned to me. "Gracie," he said, "do not sign that paper. You do not owe them a dime. They owe you." The words, "Your contract has expired," hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot, dense and acrid. The man in the charcoal suit stood in the center of the room, an anchor of calm in a sea of rising panic. But it was not his voice that broke the silence next. It was Uncle Vince. Vince was Ray's older brother, a man who had spent his life working in a body shop, his hands permanently stained with grease and his back bent from years of leaning under hoods. He had been quiet all night, sinking lower in his chair as I exposed the car payments. But now he stood up slowly, his heavy chair scraping against the floorboards with a sound that made everyone flinch. He was staring at the man in the suit. His face was drained of blood, looking as pale as the white tablecloths. "Ray," Vince said. His voice was not a shout. It was a tremble. "You are doing it again. You are doing the thing you swore you would never do again." Ray whipped his head around, his eyes wide and frantic. "Sit down. Vince, this does not concern you." "It concerns all of us if he is here," Vince said, raising a shaking hand to point at the stranger. "I know that face. I saw it on the news 30 years ago. He cannot be here. Ray, the agreement said he could never step foot in this county." The room erupted into whispers. The 75 relatives who had been sitting in judgment of me were suddenly looking at each other, their eyes darting with the realization that they were sitting on top of a landmine. Ray looked at the stranger, then at the double doors. He was sweating profusely now, the perspiration soaking through his gray collar. "Security!" Ray yelled, his voice cracking. "Where is the manager? Get this man out of here. He is an intruder. He is trespassing on a private event." The doors to the kitchen swung open, and a young manager in a blazer hurried out, looking alarmed. He looked at Ray, red-faced and screaming, and then he looked at the man in the suit, who was standing perfectly still, radiating an aura of absolute, untouchable authority. "Sir," the manager said to Ray, wringing his hands, "is there a problem?" "This man is harassing my family," Ray shouted, pointing a trembling finger. "I want him removed immediately. Call the police." The manager looked at the stranger. The stranger turned his head slightly and met the manager's eyes. He did not say a word. He just adjusted his cufflink. The manager hesitated. He looked back at Ray. "Sir, unless there is a physical altercation or a direct threat, we cannot forcibly remove a guest from the common area," the manager said, his voice apologetic but firm. "He is standing near the exit. He is not disrupting the service. He is disrupting my life," Ray shrieked. The man in the suit finally spoke again. His voice was low, cutting through Ray's hysteria like a blade through silk. "I am not here to cause a disturbance. Ray," he said, "I am here to ensure that the law is followed. I am here to witness, and I am here to make sure that when the clock strikes midnight, the transition happens exactly as it was written." I looked at the stranger. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Vince knew him. Ray was terrified of him, and he was looking at me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. But in the sudden quiet, it carried. He looked at me. The hardness in his eyes softened, just for a fraction of a second, before returning to steel. "That is not the question you should be asking right now." "Gracie," he said. "What should I be asking?" I challenged, stepping closer to him, ignoring Ray's inarticulate noises of protest. He nodded toward the table, toward the red folder and the broken pen. "Ask them about the account," he said. "The account?" I repeated. "Ask them about the bank account that was opened in your name 3 days after you were born," the man said. "Ask them why it has a standing deposit every month for 30 years, and ask them whose signature has been authorizing the withdrawals." I turned back to the table. Denise was gripping the edge of the tablecloth so hard, her knuckles were white. Her face was a mask of sheer terror. She looked like a cornered animal waiting for the trap to snap shut. Ray tried to recover. He saw the doubt in my eyes. the confusion, and he tried to pivot. He forced a smile onto his face, a ghastly, stretched thing that did not reach his eyes. "Gracie, honey," Ray said, holding out his hands in a pleading gesture. "Do not listen to him. He is a mentally unstable man. We have had trouble with him before. He is obsessed with our family. He says there is an account." "Ray," I said, "is there?" "It is a savings account," Ray said quickly. "Just a little rainy day fund we started for you. We were going to surprise you with it later, but you have to sign the paper first. It is part of the legal requirement to release the funds." He was lying. I could hear it in the pitch of his voice, see it in the way his eyes refused to lock with mine. He was improvising, and he was doing a terrible job of it. "Just sign the note." "Gracie," Ray pleaded, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We will go home. We will have cake. We will talk about everything in private. Away from these crazy people. Just you and me and your mother. Like always. Like always." The words sent a chill down my spine. Like always meant lies. Like always meant me paying for their mistakes. Like always meant silence. "I am not going anywhere with you," I said. Suddenly, there was a sound of a chair crashing over. I jumped. We all turned. It was Aunt Marlene. She had stood up so abruptly that her folding chair had tipped backward onto the floor. She was standing in the aisle, clutching her oversized handbag to her chest. Tears were streaming down her face, ruining her powder, cutting dark tracks through her makeup. "Marlene?" I asked. She was trembling violently. She looked at Ray, then at Denise, and finally at me. "I cannot do it," she sobbed. "I cannot sit here and watch you do it to her." "Marlene, shut your mouth," Denise screamed. It was a guttural sound, primal and vicious. "Sit down! No!" Marlene cried out, her voice rising to a wail. "You said it would be a party. You said you were going to tell her the truth nicely. You did not say you were going to arrest her." "Marlene, I am warning you," Ray bellowed, stepping out from behind the table. Marlene ignored him. She looked at me. Her eyes filled with a lifetime of guilt. I kept them. "Gracie." She wept. "Denise told me to burn them. She told me to take the box to the incinerator behind the shop 10 years ago. But I could not do it. It felt like a sin." "What did you keep?" "Marlene?" I asked, walking toward her. Denise moved then. She moved fast. She rounded the table, her heels clicking rapidly on the floor. "Don't you dare!" Denise shrieked. Marlene fumbled with the clasp of her bag. Her hands were shaking so badly she dropped it, but she managed to grab a handful of papers before it hit the floor. They were old papers, yellowed at the edges, bound together with a brittle rubber band. "I have the slips," Marlene yelled, holding them up as if they were a shield. "I have the deposit slips from the lawyer, and the withdrawal slips with Denise's signature." Denise reached her. She did not hit Marlene in the face. She lunged for the papers. She swung her arm in a wild, frantic arc, her hand slapping against the sheaf of documents with a loud thwack. "Give me those!" Denise screamed, clawing at her sister's hands. "They are mine!" The papers flew into the air. They scattered like confetti, pink carbon copies, white bank receipts, old perforated stubs. They fluttered down around the two women, a rain of evidence landing on the polished floor of the Briarstone room. "Oh my God!" Kinsley yelled. I looked over. Kinsley was right there. She had followed the action. Her phone was held high, steady as a rock. She was capturing every second of it. "Mom, stop it!" Kinsley shouted, playing the role of the horrified daughter for her audience. "You are hurting her." Denise did not stop. She fell to her knees, frantically trying to gather the papers, shoving them into the bodice of her dress, stuffing them into her pockets. She looked deranged. She looked guilty. "Leave them," I shouted. Running forward, I grabbed Denise's wrist. She looked up at me, and the hatred in her eyes was so pure, so undiluted, that I recoiled. "You ungrateful little wretch," Denise hissed, spitting the words at me. "We should have left you where we found you." The room was in chaos. Relatives were standing up, shouting, some trying to pull Denise up, others backing away as if she were contagious. But amidst the noise, One sound cut through. It was Kinsley. She was reading from her screen, her voice high and breathless with adrenaline. 70,000 people. She shouted. 70,000 people are watching this. Mom! They are screenshotting everything. Kinsley pointed the camera at the floor, zooming in on the papers that Denise had missed. Look at this, Kinsley narrated. Look at the amounts. I looked down. One of the pink slips had landed near my shoe. I picked it up. It was a cashier's check receipt from Wilder Holdings Trust, dated 12 years ago. Paid to the order of Ray and Denise Coleman. Amount, $4,500. Memo, monthly stipend, G.C., care and maintenance. I stared at the number. $4,500. A month? I did the math in my head instantly. 12 months a year. 30 years. That was over $1,600,000. They had been paid. They had been paid to raise me. They had been paid a fortune. And yet, they had made me pay for my own car. They had made me pay for my own tuition. They had made me feel like a burden every single day of my life, while they cashed checks that were meant for my care. I looked up at Ray. He was standing frozen, watching Denise scrabble on the floor. He knew it was over. He knew the curtain had been pulled back. I looked at the man in the suit. He had not moved. He watched the scene with a grim satisfaction. I held up the pink slip. You got paid, I said. My voice was quiet, but in the sudden hush that followed the scuffle, it sounded like a thunderclap. I walked toward Ray. You told me I cost you $500,000, I said, shaking the paper in his face. You gave me an itemized bill, but you were getting $4,000 a month. You were getting paid a salary to be my parents. Ray backed away, hitting the edge of the table. It was for expenses, he stammered. Kids are expensive. The inflation, the taxes. You stole it. I said, you stole the money meant for me, and then you stole my money on top of it. You double-dipped. You are not just liars. You are thieves. Denise stood up, her dress rumpled, clutching a fistful of crumpled receipts. Her hair was wild. We earned it, she screamed. We put up with you. We put up with the secrecy. We deserved every penny. The admission hung there. She admitted it. She admitted it was a job. She admitted I was a transaction. I felt something break inside me. It was the last tether of affection, the last thread of hope that maybe, just maybe, they had loved me in their own twisted way. It snapped, and I felt free. I turned to Kinsley. Did you get that? I asked her. Kinsley looked at me. Her eyes were wide. She nodded. I got it, she whispered. Everyone got it. I looked at the crowd of relatives. They were not looking at me with judgment anymore. They were looking at Ray and Denise with horror. They were looking at people who had sold a child and then tried to bill the child for the privilege. The man in the suit checked his watch. 11:55, he said clearly. He looked at me. Gracie, he said, it is almost time. Time for what? I asked. Time for the truth, he said. He walked over to the table, picked up the red folder that contained the fake DNA results, and tossed it into a trash can near the service station. That is garbage, he said. If you want to know who you are, stop looking at them. He pointed to Ray and Denise, and look at the door. I turned, and then I realized he wasn't pointing at the door for someone else to come in. He was pointing at the door because he was about to open it, but not yet. Wait, I said. You said ask about the account. I asked. They admitted it. Now tell me who you are. The man smiled. It was a sad smile, full of a grief I did not understand. Not yet, he said. 5 more minutes. He looked at the woman with the binder. Prepare the documents, he told her. The woman nodded and placed her black binder on the table, right over the spot where the blue ink had stained the cloth. She opened it. It was not a scrapbook. It was a legal dossier. Ray saw the binder. He recognized it. No, Ray whispered. You cannot. The NDA. The NDA dies at midnight. Ray, the man said, and so does your immunity. The room waited. The clock on the wall ticked. The seconds felt like hours. I stood in the wreckage of my family, surrounded by the debris of their lies, and waited for the bell that would signal the end of the world. The chaos of the scattered receipts was still settling, the air thick with the dust of 30 years of secrets, when the woman standing next to the man in the charcoal suit finally moved. She had been a silent statue until this moment, a figure in the periphery that Ray and Denise had tried desperately to ignore. But as Denise scrambled on the floor, clutching the pink slips that proved she had sold my childhood for a monthly stipend, the woman stepped into the light. She did not walk like a guest. She walked like a verdict. She was young, perhaps my age, but her demeanor was tempered steel. She wore a black suit that was tailored within an inch of its life, and she carried the black binder as if it were the tablet of commandments. She stopped at the end of the long table, creating a triangulation between me, Ray, and herself. "My name is Eleanor Vance," she announced. Her voice was not loud, but it had the crystal-clear projection of someone who spent her days in federal courtrooms. "I am retained counsel for an interested party regarding the estate and trust of Gracie Coleman." Ray looked up from the floor. His face was a mask of sweat and ruin. "You have no business here," Ray shouted, though the fight was draining out of him. "This is a family matter." "Ms." Vance ignored him. She placed the binder on the table. It made a heavy, dull thud that silenced the few relatives who were still whispering. She opened it. She did not produce a birthday card. She produced 2 thick, stapled documents. She slid the first one toward Ray. "This is a formal demand for accounting," she said. She slid the second one next to it. "And this is a notice of breach of fiduciary duty, coupled with a constructive fraud complaint." Ray stared at the papers. He did not touch them. His hands, resting on the tablecloth, began to tremble. It started in his fingers and traveled up his wrists until his entire forearms were shaking. The whole room saw it. The strong father act had dissolved, leaving behind a terrified con artist. "Everything that has happened in this room tonight has been recorded." "Ms." Vance continued, "the false claims of debt, the attempted coercion, the physical intimidation, and most notably, the admission of receipt of funds from the Wilder Trust." She looked at Kinsley. "And thank you, Ms. Coleman, for live streaming the evidence to 70,000 witnesses. We will be subpoenaing that footage." Kinsley went pale. She lowered her phone slowly, the realization dawning on her that her quest for viral fame might have just indicted her parents. I looked at the table. My eyes drifted from the terrifying legal documents back to the red folder that the man in the suit, Graham, had tossed aside earlier. The DNA results. Something about it bothered me. I walked over to the trash can where Graham had thrown it. I picked it up. "Don't touch that," Ray croaked, but he was too paralyzed to stop me. I smoothed out the crumpled paper. I looked at the colorful bar graphs again. Apex Gene Solutions. I looked closer at the data strings. In the hospital, I spent hours staring at lab codes. There was a syntax to them, a rhythm. I looked at the sample ID number for the child sample. ID 1024-BDAY-TMPL-01. I blinked. 1024, October 24th, today's date, BDAY, birthday, TMPL, template. It wasn't a sample code, it was a file name. I looked at the father sample ID RAY-C-001-TEST. I felt a cold laugh bubbling up in my throat. It was so lazy. It was so incredibly, insultingly lazy. They hadn't even sent samples to a scam lab. They hadn't paid for a fake test. They had just photoshopped a template they found on the internet. I looked up at Kinsley. She was chewing her lip, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped bird. "Kinsley," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. She jumped. "You are good with computers." I said, "You edit all your own videos. You know how to use graphic design software." "I do," she stammered. I held up the paper, pointing to the sample ID. "Who designed this?" I asked. Kinsley froze. She looked at Ray. Ray was staring at the table, refusing to meet her eyes. "I asked you a question." "Kinsley," I said, stepping closer. "Who put this together? Because this is not a lab report. This is a PDF you edited. The sample ID literally says, birthday template." The room gasped. I heard Uncle Vince mutter a curse word under his breath. Kinsley started to cry. Real tears this time. "I just wanted to help," she wailed. "Dad said he needed a prop. He said the real results would take too long to come in the mail and he needed something dramatic for the speech. A prop, my identity, my genetic history, the core truth of who I was. To them, it was a prop. "So you made it?" I asked, my voice trembling with rage. "You sat at your computer. You typed in 0%, and you printed it out?" "He told me what to type," Kinsley cried, pointing an accusing finger at Ray. "He dictated the numbers. He said to make it look official so you would get scared and sign the paper." Ray closed his eyes. And then, Denise lost it. She scrambled to her feet, her face purple with exertion and fury. She did not look at Kinsley with maternal protection. She looked at her like a co-conspirator who had cracked under interrogation. "You stupid girl!" Denise screamed at Kinsley. "I told you to keep your mouth shut. I told you to just film the reaction." The words hung there, vibrating in the silence. I told you to just film the reaction. It was the final nail. The confirmation that this entire evening, the party, the guests, the surprise, the tears, was a scripted production. They had cast themselves as the victims and me as the villain, and they had directed every scene. The crowd of relatives was dead silent. They were no longer guests at a party. They were witnesses to a crime scene. I looked at the promissory note again, the one with the broken pen lying next to it. The pieces finally clicked together in my mind. The terror Ray showed when I asked about the date. The waiver clause buried in the fine print. The desperate need for me to sign tonight. The DNA result was irrelevant. It didn't matter if I was their child or not. It didn't matter if I owed them money or not. The only thing that mattered was that piece of paper. "They did not want my money," I said. Realizing it aloud, I looked at Ms. Vance. "They do not want $500,000 from me. No." "Ms." Vance said coolly. "They do not." I picked up the promissory note. I looked at the waiver clause again. "The undersigned hereby waives all claims to any and all external assets. They want my signature," I said, looking at Ray. "Because if I sign this, I am not just agreeing to pay you back. I am signing away my rights to something else." I looked at the date on the contract. October 25th. "Whatever happens tomorrow." I said, "Whatever happens when I turn 30 if I sign this. You get it, and I get nothing." Ray looked up. His eyes were dead. "It is yours," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "It was supposed to be ours. We raised you. We did the work. Why should you get the payout just because you survived? Because it belongs to her." "Ray," the man in the suit said. Graham walked to the table. He stood next to Ms. Vance. He looked at me, and his eyes were red-rimmed. He looked like a man who had been holding his breath for a very long time. He looked at the clock on the wall. 11:58, Graham said. He turned to Ms. Vance. "Is everything in order?" he asked. Ms. Vance nodded. "The filings are ready for electronic submission the second the hour strikes. The petition to remove the guardians, the motion to unseal the records, and the formal acceptance of the beneficiary." Ray made a noise, a low moan of despair. Denise was just staring at the floor, muttering to herself. Graham looked at me. "They built a courtroom here tonight." "Gracie," he said softly, "they acted like prosecutors. They tried to convict you of being a burden. They tried to shame you into signing that paper." He gestured to the room, to the decorations, to the silent relatives. "They knew that at midnight, you become the sole trustee of the Wilder estate. They knew that once you turned 30, their access to the funds, the stipend, the allowances, the skimming, would be cut off permanently. Unless I signed it away," I finished. "Unless I signed a paper admitting I owed them, which would let them garnish the trust forever." "Exactly," Graham said. "They tried to steal your inheritance 5 minutes before you were eligible to receive it. And they used your own birthday as the weapon. I looked at Ray. He seemed small now, shrunken. The terrifying patriarch, who had controlled my life with guilt and silence, was just a greedy man in a cheap suit who had gambled everything on a bluff and lost. Why? I asked him. Not why did you steal? I know why people steal. But why did you hate me? Ray looked at me. For a second, I saw a flicker of something human, maybe shame, maybe regret. We didn't hate you, Gracie, he said quietly. We just resented that you were rich, and we were just the help. That was it. In their minds. They were the employees, and I was the employer they couldn't fire. I looked at the clock. 11:59. The second hand swept around the face. I looked at Graham. Who are you? I asked again. He took a deep breath. He reached into his inside pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. It was thick. It was old. The paper was yellowed, but the seal was unbroken. He held it out to me. My name is Graham Wilder, he said, and 30 years ago, I made a mistake that cost me everything. I trusted the wrong people to keep you safe. He looked at Ray and Denise with a cold. Final judgment, but I'm here to fix it. The clock ticked. Click, midnight. Graham smiled. Happy birthday. Gracie, he said, you are free. The silence that followed Graham's declaration was not peaceful. It was the silence of a held breath, the heavy, suffocating pause before a structure finally collapses under its own weight. The clock on the wall had ticked past midnight. The day, my 30th birthday, had officially begun, and with it, the invisible deadline that Ray and Denise had been racing against had passed. Ray stood by the table, his chest heaving. He looked like a gambler who had bet the house on a single hand of cards and was now staring at a pair of twos. What happens after midnight? Ray? I asked. My voice was steady, but my hands were clenched into fists at my sides. He did not answer. He looked at the floor, his jaw working as he ground his teeth. I took a step closer to him. You were terrified of the clock, I said. You were trying to force me to sign a document dated for tomorrow. Now it is tomorrow. So tell me, what did you just lose? Ray looked up. His eyes were bloodshot, frantic. Nothing, he rasped. We lost nothing. We are just disappointed in you. Gracie, we wanted to help you clear your debts before you started this new chapter. Lies. Even now, standing in the wreckage of his own scheme. He could not stop lying. It was pathological. Denise stepped in then. She saw that intimidation had failed. She saw that the bad cop routine had only driven me further away. So, like a snake shedding its skin. She instantly shifted tactics. She softened her posture. She clasped her hands together and tilted her head, adopting the look of the long-suffering. Benevolent mother, Gracie, listen to me, Denise said, her voice dropping to a wheedling tone. We are all tired. Emotions are high. Maybe we went about this the wrong way. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the key fob to the RAV4 again. She held it out. Not as a weapon this time, but as an offering. If you sign the paper, we will forget all of this, she said. We will give you the keys back right now. You can drive your car home. And the letter? Ray will write it tonight. He will write the best recommendation letter Cedar Ridge has ever seen. I looked at the keys, then I looked at her face. She really thought I was that cheap. She thought my dignity could be bought for a Toyota and a piece of paper. And we will forgive you, Denise added, tears welling up in her eyes on command. The family will forgive you for this outburst. We can go back to how it was. We can be a family again. I laughed. It was a sharp, jagged sound that startled the room. Forgive me? I asked. You steal from me for 30 years. You lie to me about my own name, and you are offering to forgive me? It is a generous offer, Ray shouted, losing his composure again. You need that letter. Gracie, you said yourself the clinical lead position requires board connections. You walk out of here without us, and you are just a nobody nurse with no backing. I looked at Ray, and I felt a sudden surge of pity. He was so small. He was so convinced that his petty influence was the center of the universe. I do not need your letter. Ray, I said clearly. He blinked. What? I do not need your recommendation. I repeated. I never did. I reached into my small clutch purse, past the phone that was still recording, and pulled out a folded piece of paper I had received 2 days ago. I had not told them about it because I wanted to see if they would come through. Now, I was glad I had kept it hidden. I unfolded it. I already have a letter. I said, It is from Dr. Sterling himself. Ray's mouth fell open. Dr. Sterling? The chairman of the board? I treated his granddaughter in the ICU last month. I said, I did not ask for a favor. I just did my job. He sent this to HR yesterday. He called me a candidate of exceptional integrity and skill. I dropped the paper onto the table, right on top of their fraudulent contract. So you see, Ray, I said, I do not need your connections. And I definitely do not need your forgiveness. The color drained from Ray's face completely. The leverage was gone. The car, the career, the guilt. He had nothing left to threaten me with. And that was when he snapped. The facade of the concerned father shattered, revealing the ugly, snarling creature beneath. He slammed his fists onto the table, making the silverware rattle. Who do you think you are? He screamed. Spit flying from his lips. The room recoiled. You think you are special? Ray yelled, his face purple. You are nothing. You are a paycheck. You were a job that we could not quit. We fed you. We housed you. We put up with your moody silence for 3 decades, and this is the thanks we get? You stand there and talk back to me? He lunged around the table, his hand raised as if to strike me. Daddy? No! Kinsley shrieked. She turned the camera to follow him. The live stream comments were exploding. I could see the wall of text scrolling so fast it was a blur. He is attacking her. Call the cops. This man is a psycho. Ray stopped short of hitting me, but he stood inches from my face, breathing hard. You belong to us, he hissed. We made you. Ms. Vance, the lawyer, stepped forward. She did not look intimidated. She looked bored. Mr. Coleman, she said, her voice cutting through his rage. I would suggest you step back. Every threat you make increases the settlement amount. Ray spun on her. What settlement? There is no money. We spent it. It is gone. We know you spent the stipend. Ms. Vance said calmly, we are not talking about the stipend. We are talking about the trust. She turned to the confused relatives in the room. She decided it was time to pull the curtain back completely. There is an escrow arrangement attached to the Wilder estate. Ms. Vance explained, projecting her voice to the back of the room. It was established 30 years ago. The terms were simple. A significant sum was placed in a trust to be released to the beneficiary, Gracie, upon her 30th birthday. She pointed to the promissory note. However, there is a clause, she continued. If the beneficiary has outstanding debts to the guardians that exceed a certain percentage of the trust's value, or if the beneficiary voluntarily signs a disclaimer of interest, the control of the trust reverts to the guardians. A collective gasp went through the room. It was not about paying back $500,000. It was about stealing millions. They wanted me to sign that paper so they could take the inheritance. I said, realizing the full scope of their greed. They wanted to trick me into signing away my birthright 5 minutes before it became mine. Precisely. Ms. Vance said, and since the clock has struck midnight, and you have not signed, the window for their claim has closed. The trust is now yours. Solely yours. Denise let out a wail. It was a sound of pure agony, the sound of a woman watching a lottery ticket burn. No, she cried. We earned it. We put in the time. Marlene stood up again. She was still holding the few scraps of paper she had saved. She walked toward the table, her steps heavy. Denise, she said, her voice shaking. Is that why? Denise glared at her. Is that why what? Is that why you made me go to the bank? Marlene asked. Denise's eyes widened. Shut up. Marlene, for years, Marlene said, turning to look at me. For years. She would give me checks from the Wilder Trust. She told me they were government checks for your medical care. She said if they cashed them directly, it would mess up Ray's tax bracket. So she made me cash them and give her the money. Marlene started to cry again. She told me it was for you. Gracie. She said she was buying you clothes. She said she was saving for your college. But every time I asked how you were, she told me to mind my own business, money laundering. They had used my own aunt to launder the stolen money. I looked at Ray. He was leaning against the table, looking defeated. You used everyone. I said, you used Marlene? You used Kinsley? You used me? I did what I had to do, Ray shouted weakly. We have expenses. We have a lifestyle. Graham Wilder stepped into the circle. He had been watching the legal dismantling of the Colemans with a grim satisfaction, but now his focus was entirely on me. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. It was not a legal document. It was personal. It was thick, creamy paper, yellowed with age, sealed with a wax crest that had cracked over time. This does not belong to the lawyers, Graham said, his voice soft. And it certainly does not belong to them. He held it out to me. What is it? I asked. It is the one thing they could not spend, Graham said. It is from your mother, your real mother. Denise saw the envelope. Her eyes went wide with a new kind of panic. Not financial panic, but the terror of a secret being revealed that could not be fixed with money. Don't! Denise screamed. She lunged. She moved faster than I thought possible for a woman in heels. She threw herself at Graham, her hands clawing for the envelope. Don't give that to her. She doesn't need to know. Ray moved too. He saw Denise move and instinct took over. He grabbed for the envelope, his fingers brushing against the paper. Give it to me, Ray yelled. That is Coleman property. I stepped back, clutching my chest. But I did not need to fight them. Ms. Vance moved. For a lawyer. She had the reflexes of a bodyguard. She stepped between Ray and Graham, her hand raised flat against Ray's chest. Touch it, Mr. Coleman, and this becomes criminal, she warned. Her voice was low, dangerous. You are currently facing civil fraud. If you touch that envelope, I will have you arrested for assault and theft before you can blink. Do you want to leave this room in handcuffs? Ray froze. He looked at Ms. Vance. He looked at the busboy who was now talking on a cell phone, likely to the police. He looked at the 75 relatives who were staring at him with absolute revulsion. He lowered his hand. Denise was panting, held back by the sheer force of Graham's glare. You will destroy her, Denise hissed at Graham. If you let her read that, you destroy everything. I am not destroying anything. Denise, Graham said, I am just turning on the lights. He turned to me. He held the envelope out again. The wax seal was red. It had a symbol I did not recognize. A bird taking flight. Gracie, Graham said. I looked at him. The man in the suit. The man who had waited 30 years to walk through that door. I looked at the envelope. Is it bad? I asked. Graham looked at me, and his eyes were full of a terrible, beautiful sadness. He leaned in close, so close that only the microphone in my purse and the camera in Kinsley's hand could hear him. If you want the truth, you will get it tonight, he said, but it will break the lie they have lived on. It will change everything you think you know about why you are here. I reached out. My hand trembled. I took the envelope. Open it, Graham whispered, and finish it. The wax seal on the envelope cracked with a sharp, brittle sound that echoed in the silence of the Briarstone room. I held the letter in my trembling hands, but before I could unfold the paper inside, Graham Wilder stepped past the barrier of the table, past the broken pen and the scattered receipts, and stood directly in front of me. He did not look at the 75 stunned relatives. He did not look at the camera that Kinsley was still clutching with white-knuckled desperation. He looked only at me, and in his eyes, I saw the reflection of my own face, the same dark eyes, the same arch of the brow, the same stubborn set of the jaw that I had never seen in Ray or Denise. I am not just the administrator of the trust. Gracie, Graham said, his voice thick with an emotion he had clearly held back for decades. I am not just a witness. He took a breath that seemed to shake his entire frame. I am your father. The words hit the room like a physical shockwave. Denise let out a strangled sob and sank into her chair, covering her face with her hands. Ray stared at Graham with a mixture of hatred and absolute defeat. I stared at him, the man in the suit, the stranger who had watched me from the shadows. My father, my mother, Elena. Graham continued, his voice gaining strength, turning to address the room so there would be no ambiguity. She did not die in a car accident. She died of complications during childbirth. But before she passed, she made me promise to protect you. We were young. We were from different worlds. My family, the Wilder family. They would not have accepted a child out of wedlock. They would have crushed you. They would have taken you away and put you in a system where you would have been just a number. He pointed a shaking finger at Ray. So we made a deal, Graham said, his voice hardening into steel. We found a couple, a respectable, middle-class couple, who claimed they wanted a child but could not conceive. We signed a contract. I would stay away. I would not contact you. I would let you live a normal, a quiet life until you were 30 years old enough to inherit the estate without my family being able to contest it. He looked at me, pleading for understanding. I stayed away. Gracie. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. I watched from a distance. I saw you graduate. I saw you get your nursing degree. I thought I was buying you a safe, happy childhood. He turned to Ray, and his expression shifted from sorrow to a terrifying rage. But I was paying for a prison. Ms. Vance, the lawyer, stepped forward again. She opened the binder to a new page, displaying a spreadsheet with rows of black numbers. Let us be clear about the financials, she announced, her voice crisp and clinical. The Wilder Trust did not just ask the Colemans to be guardians out of the goodness of their hearts. We set up an escrow account. She tapped the paper. $4,500 a month, adjusted for inflation annually. She read, for 30 years, that totals $1,900,000 paid to Ray and Denise Coleman for the care, maintenance, and education of Gracie Coleman. The room gasped. Nearly $2 million. Ray tried to speak, but his voice was a dry croak. We invested it. You spent it. Ms. Vance corrected him sharply. We have the audit. You bought the house. You bought the cars. You paid for Kinsley's private school tuition. You paid for vacations to Cabo and Vail. You spent every single dime of the money meant for Gracie's well-being on yourselves. She turned to the crowd. But that was not enough for them, she said, because greed is a bottomless pit. Not only did they spend the $2 million meant for her, they then turned around and charged Gracie for her own existence. She pointed to the phone in my hand, the one displaying the bank transfers. They made her pay for her own car. They made her pay for her own tuition. They made her pay rent to live in the house that her trust fund was paying the mortgage on. They double-dipped. They took the stipend, and then they stole her salary. I felt the blood rushing in my ears. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. They hadn't just used me, they had harvested me. And tonight, Graham said, stepping in, was the final play. The trust fund, the principal amount, which is significantly larger than the stipend, releases to you legally at the age of 30, unless I disclaimed it. I whispered, exactly, Graham said. That promissory note Ray tried to force you to sign? It contained a disclaimer clause. If you had signed that paper before midnight, you would have acknowledged a fake debt and transferred your rights to the trust over to them as repayment. They would have taken the millions, and you would have been left with a 10-year payment plan for a debt you did not owe. He looked at Ray. They waited until the last possible minute because they knew you were vulnerable. They used your birthday. They used your desire for their love. They weaponized your own hope against you. Ms. Vance picked up another document from her binder. And when they realized you might not sign, she added, they tried to bypass you entirely. We have evidence that 3 days ago, an application for a $50,000 loan was submitted using your Social Security number from an IP address registered to this building, specifically. To Ray Coleman's home office, she looked at Denise. That is identity fraud. Ms., Vance said, that is a felony, and since you used the mail and the internet to conduct it, it is wire fraud. We are talking about federal charges. Denise let out a wail. Sliding off her chair onto the floor, she grabbed the hem of my dress. Gracie, please, she sobbed. We were desperate. The business failed years ago. We have nothing. We only did it because we were drowning. I looked down at the woman I had called mother. I looked at the hands that had taken my checks every month for 8 years. You were drowning? I asked softly. So you decided to use me as a life raft? You decided to hold my head under the water so you could breathe? I pulled my dress from her grip. I looked at the envelope in my hand. The one from Leona. I opened it. The letter inside was short. The handwriting was elegant, looped, and hurried, as if written against a deadline. My dearest Gracie, if you are reading this, then 30 years have passed, and I am gone. But please know this, my sweet girl. You were never unwanted. You were never a mistake. You were the only thing in this world that I loved enough to let go of. I gave you up so you could be safe. I gave you up so you could be free. Do not let anyone tell you that you do not belong. You are my heart, beating outside of my body. Live for me. Love, Elena. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. It was hot and fast. For 30 years. Ray and Denise had made me feel like an imposition, a stray dog they had reluctantly taken in. But the truth was in my hand. I was not abandoned. I was saved. I folded the letter and placed it gently against my chest. I looked up. The room was silent. 75 pairs of eyes were fixed on me. Cousins who had ignored me. Aunts who had criticized my cheap clothes. Uncles who had laughed when Ray made jokes about my debt. I took a step toward them. You all watched. I said. My voice was not loud, but it filled the room. I looked at Aunt Marlene, who was still weeping. I looked at Uncle Vince, who hung his head. I looked at the cousins in the back row. You came here tonight to watch a public execution. I told them. You sat there while he read a fake bill. You sat there while she took my keys. You sat there while they tried to strip me of my dignity. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle on their shoulders. You did not speak up because you thought I was guilty. I said, you spoke up. Or rather, you stayed silent. Because it was easier. Because you did not want to rock the boat. Because you wanted the free food and the show. I shook my head. Well, the show is over. I said, tonight, you are witnesses. But you are not witnessing my humiliation. You are witnessing a crime. And if any of you try to say, you didn't know, remember that there are 70,000 people on the internet who just watched you do nothing. I turned to Kinsley. She was still filming, but her hands were shaking so hard the image must have been vibrating. Turn it off, Kinsley. I said. She stared at me, paralyzed. I said, turn it off, I shouted. She fumbled with the phone and the screen went black. The ring light died, plunging the room back into the dim, ambient lighting of the restaurant. Ray was leaning against the table, looking like a ghost. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear. Not fear of the police, but fear of the void that was opening up in front of him. Gracie. Ray whispered, we are still family. We raised you. Does that count for nothing? You cannot just leave us to go to jail. Denise nodded frantically, wiping mascara from her cheeks. Yes, we made mistakes. But we loved you in our own way. Please, Gracie, sign the waiver. Just help us this one last time. We will pay you back. I swear. I looked at them. I looked at the people who had defined my worth by a $sign for 3 decades. I thought about the 16-year-old girl eating frozen pizza while they threw a party for Kinsley. I thought about the nurse working double shifts to pay for a car she didn't own. I thought about the woman who had walked into this room hoping for a birthday cake and had been handed a bill. I walked over to the table. I picked up the promissory note. Ray's eyes lit up with a flicker of hope. I held the paper up, and I ripped it. I ripped it in half, then in quarters, then into tiny confetti-sized pieces. I let the pieces fall onto the table, covering the broken pen and the blue ink stain. No, I said. I will not help you. Gracie, Ray cried out. You stole my past. I said, my voice hard as diamond. You tried to steal my future. And now you want to claim my mercy? I leaned in close, so close I could smell the stale sweat of his fear. You don't get to ruin me and still call it love. Ray, I turned my back on him. It was the easiest thing I had ever done. Ms. Vance, I said. Yes. Ms. Coleman? The lawyer replied. Do I own the car? I asked. Technically, the title is in Ray's name, she said. But since you have proof of payments exceeding the value, we can file a constructive trust claim. However, legally I cut her off. I did not want the car. The car was a cage. Keep it. I said to Denise, you can sell it to pay for your defense attorney. I grabbed my purse. I checked to make sure Elena's letter was safe inside. I looked at Graham. He was waiting for me. He held out his hand. Ready? He asked. I looked around the Briarstone room one last time. It smelled of old lilies and betrayal. Yes, I said. I am ready. I took his hand. It was warm and strong. We walked toward the double doors. The crowd parted for us like the Red Sea. No one said a word. No one tried to stop us. Ray and Denise stood by the ruins of their scheme, watching the golden goose walk out the door, knowing that the police were on their way and the money was gone forever. I pushed the doors open and stepped out into the night air. It was cool and crisp. The stars were out. I was 30 years old. I had no car. I had just lost the only family I had ever known. But as I walked down the steps, holding the hand of the father who had come back for me, I realized I wasn't empty. I was full. I was full of truth. And for the first time in my life, I was free. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Gracie finding her truth and her justice. If you did, please let me know in the comments. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Are you listening from the US, the UK, Vietnam, or somewhere else? Let's chat in the comments section below. Don't forget to subscribe to the Leona Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to me.